If you have shade on your plot and still consider it a problem, you are literally losing harvest every season. Not because there isn't enough sun, but because you're planting the wrong crops. There are plants that don't benefit from full sun. It actually damages them. And now I'll show you 8 crops that become stronger, tastier, and more stable in the shade. Let's start with cilantro. Most people hate growing it in summer because it bolts within days. That's not a whim. It's a protective response to overheating. In heat, cilantro completes its life cycle and escapes through seed production. But in partial shade, it stays in the leaf stage for weeks longer. The aroma becomes milder, without the sharp note many describe as soapy. Many gardeners have observed that shade-grown cilantro produces 2 to 3 times more cuttings before bolting. This isn't magic. It's reduced temperature stress. Spinach is next. Its main problem isn't pests or soil. Its enemy is heat. At high temperatures, compounds that intensify bitterness accumulate more actively in the leaves, and the plant rapidly bolts. In shade, leaf temperature is lower, transpiration is calmer, and spinach stays tender much longer. Moreover, a cooler environment allows it to retain tissue juiciness for a longer period. That's exactly why spring and fall spinach are considered the best. They grow under conditions close to partial shade. Arugula is one of the most underrated shade champions. In full sun, it can become aggressively pungent in just a week. In partial shade, the flavor remains spicy but balanced. An interesting fact: wild arugula historically grew along the edges of Mediterranean landscapes, often among rocks and partial shading, not in open fields. Its nature isn't extreme sun, it's moderation. In shade, you get stable leaves that can be harvested several times per season. Now lettuce. Everyone complains, it's impossible to grow good lettuce in summer. It is possible, just not under scorching sun. In partial shade, lettuce forms a flower stalk more slowly, meaning it remains edible longer. The leaves become thinner, juicier, often even slightly sweet. The reason is simple. The plant doesn't overheat and doesn't trigger its emergency reproduction mechanism. You gain weeks of harvest without bitterness. That's a massive difference. Kale. Many consider it exclusively sun-loving. Yes, it tolerates sun, but in shade, its leaves become less tough and less fibrous. Slower growth isn't a drawback, it's a texture advantage. Under moderate light, the plant builds leaf mass without excessive thickening of veins. If you've ever felt kale was too tough, try growing it where the sun shines only a few hours a day. Swiss chard is another quiet giant of the shade. A relative of beetroot, it has powerful adaptability. In partial shade, its stems are often juicier and the leaves less coarse. In addition, chard withstands temperature fluctuations and continues producing greens when many other crops have already given up. It's practically a fail-safe option for plots with diffused light. Radishes. This is where the surprise begins. Under intense sun, radishes often turn fibrous and overly sharp. In moderate light, the root develops more slowly, but the structure becomes dense and crisp without excessive pungency. Many experienced gardeners mention that summer radishes grown in light shade taste significantly better than those grown in full sun, and they still mature quickly. Radish is one of the fastest crops in the garden. And finally, watercress. It's a natural example that not everything is meant to grow in full sun. In the wild, it's most often found along streams, in cool, moist places with diffused light. Under direct rays, it can literally wilt. But in shade, with constant moisture, its leaves become vibrant, spicy, and rich. It's considered one of the most nutrient-dense leafy greens, and at the same time requires minimal direct sunlight. Now let's focus on the key point. Why does all this work? Because for leafy crops, Maximum light isn't as important as the balance of temperature and moisture. Sun accelerates growth, but it also accelerates aging. Shade slows the cycle, extends the edible phase, and reduces stress. That's the fundamental difference. And here's what's especially important. Shade is a season-extending tool. When open beds overheat, shaded ones keep producing. When lettuce in the sun has already bolted, lettuce in partial shade is just reaching peak juiciness. You literally get a second chance in summer. Add Asian greens, pak choi, mizuna, tatsoi. These crops were historically cultivated in regions with humid climates, often under partial cover. In heat, they bolt rapidly. In partial shade, they remain compact and tender. You can sow them in waves and harvest almost continuously. And if you think shade is always a disadvantage, think of a forest edge. Nature doesn't create empty zones. It creates different zones. And a smart gardener works with them, not against them. The most remarkable thing is that many of these crops don't just tolerate shade, they thrive in it. Their flavor becomes milder, their texture improves, their harvest window becomes longer. And this isn't theory. It's practice proven across thousands of gardens. If you have at least 3 hours of direct sun and diffused light the rest of the day, you already have a fully functional growing zone. Not empty space, not a problem, but a strategic resource. You've already seen that shade isn't a compromise. Now I'll show you crops that in partial shade don't just hold on, they dominate their field. And some of them might genuinely surprise you. Let's start with mint. Most people see it as an aggressive weed that thrives anywhere, but there's a nuance. In full sun, mint often loses part of its essential oils, the very compounds that give it that cooling aroma and depth of flavor. Under moderate light and consistent moisture, the concentration of these oils is higher. That's why, in traditional European herb gardens, mint was often planted not in open areas, but near walls or hedges. Less scorching, less evaporation, more intense aroma, and yes, in shade it grows denser and softer in texture. Now endive and radicchio. This is the level of serious gastronomy. Their bitterness isn't a flaw, it's a complex flavor profile. But here's the interesting part. Overheating intensifies the bitterness, making it sharp. In partial shade, the flavor stays structured but not aggressive. Historically, these crops were widely grown in southern Europe during autumn, when the sun was gentler. Some sources note that radicchio in the Veneto region was prized precisely for the firm head formed under moderate light and cool nights. Shade slows growth but enhances leaf density and texture. That's the difference between bitter and deep. Green onions may seem too simple to discuss, but here's the paradox. In partial shade, they produce more tender shoots and stay soft longer. In the sun, the shoots harden faster due to accelerated moisture loss. In softer light, cell structure remains juicier. If you've ever harvested onions in the height of summer and noticed dryness, that's why. In shade, it works like a continuous conveyor of fresh greens. Asian greens, pak choi, tatsoi, mizuna. These crops were historically grown in regions with humid climates and frequent cloudy periods. Their biology is tuned to moderate light. In hot sun, they literally bolt rapidly. In partial shade, they remain compact and firm. Tatsoi, for instance, forms a rosette that looks almost decorative in soft light, yet stays incredibly tender. Mizuna can produce multiple harvest waves in a single season. These are fast-cycling crops, and in shade you get stability instead of a race. Leaf celery is a real find. Unlike stalk celery, which demands perfect conditions, leaf celery is grown for its aroma, and that aroma concentrates more strongly under moderate light. In traditional cooking, it was the leaves, not the thick stems, that were added to broths for depth of flavor. In shade, leaves are softer, but more aromatic. It's a spice disguised as a vegetable. Sorrel, a frequently underrated crop. It handles partial shade and even light deep shade easily. Moreover, in heat, its leaves become coarser. Under moderate light, it retains that signature lemony tang it's prized for. Interestingly, sorrel was cultivated in European monastery gardens centuries ago, often in shaded spots near stone walls. It's perennial, returns year after year, and requires minimal intervention. A strategic crop for consistency. Beet greens, another undervalued resource. Yes, the root needs more sun to bulk up. But if you're growing beets for the greens, partial shade works perfectly. Leaves become softer and less fibrous. Their vitamin content rivals, and sometimes exceeds, that of Swiss chard. Here's the surprising part. Historically, in some regions, it was the greens that were used first. The root became popular later. Now let's talk strategy, because just knowing the list isn't enough. You need a system. First, pace distribution. Fast crops, radish, arugula, Asian greens, are sown in waves every 2 weeks. This ensures continuity. Second, layering. Taller plants like kale or chard can be positioned to create additional soft shade for lettuce and spinach. You're shaping a microclimate within the bed. Third, seasonal timing. Plant spring and autumn crops under leafy trees. When the canopy is dense, you get partial shade. When leaves fall, plants receive more light at the right moment for final growth. Fourth, moisture control. Shade retains water longer, which is an advantage. But soil must remain loose and well drained to prevent stagnation. Balance is key. And the most important thing, stop trying to turn shade into sun. You don't need to cut down trees or reflect sunlight with mirrors for every bed. Use zones as they are. Sunny zones for tomatoes and peppers. Shaded zones for your green conveyor. Here's what happens when you think strategically. Your plot stops being a collection of random beds and becomes a system. One zone supports another. When the sun burns out some crops, life continues in the shade. When heat disrupts plans, partial shade saves the season. That's the essence. Don't fight the conditions. Understand them. Shade isn't a limitation. It's a different growth rate, a different texture, a different flavor. And if you use it correctly, your garden becomes deeper, more stable, and smarter.